The Democratic Alliance has come out strong against the increase in cost of living. DA leader John Steenhuisen says a 14% hike in food prices spells catastrophe for millions of hungry South Africans. Steenhuisen says President Cyril Ramaphosa must expand the list of VAT-free foods, reduce fuel levies, and increase solar tax rebates. He joins us more to chat about this. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. The increase in food prices is said to be the largest annual increase in 14 years. South African consumers have been warned that it's not going to get any better. It's going to get even tougher in the next few months as inflation will continue to rise. You tweeted yesterday about this, saying it will spell catastrophe for millions of South Africans, also saying that President Ramaphosa is out of touch with the crisis at hand.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that's exactly the case. About a year ago, I took a number of food items into Parliament to confront the President with them, to say that they had gone up exponentially. And the sad tragedy is that this 14% increase in food costs is now adding to the burgeoning spiraling cost of living, which are pushing more and more South African families and households under the water. We already had a massive food insecurity problem. 82% of South African households are skipping one meal a day because they can't afford food. This 14% increase is also going to wipe out any increase, marginal as it was, to the social grants that were increased this year. That any increase in that has now been wiped out by this food increase. So it's very important that the government stops dithering and starts doing something before we have a massive starvation problem on our hands, which is also then going to cause greater suffering and put a burden on health systems, our schooling outcomes and the like. Malnutrition is already stalking the communities across the country, and it's now time for government to actually do something positive to assist families who are struggling to feed themselves. And we've been making these suggestions now for over a year. They've been ignored by government, and I think that they could bring immediate relief to poor South African families who are already struggling to make ends meet, and for whom this 14% increase is really going to be the final straw.
Because we've also been warned that this acceleration could force the SA Reserve Bank's hand for another interest rate hike in May already. So with all the solutions at hand, what are you proposing? Because South Africans are mired in a cost of living crisis at the moment.
Well, when you're in a crisis, government's got to do something. You can't ignore the problem and pretend it's going to go away. This is an immediate problem. So the number of steps we've put in place, we believe the first tranche of those would immediately bring some relief, and that would be to expand the basket of VAT-free goods in the country to include things like bone-in chicken, beef, some tinned goods, baby food, coffee, soup powder, and the like. That would immediately drop the prices on the shelves of those items because they would no longer be subject to VAT. Then we would stop the import tariffs on bone-in chicken and pasta because these items are both low energy to cook but also are consumed by large households and are able to feed a greater number of people. Then we'd need to have to look at some of the longer-term reforms that are going to be required, and one of those that we said would be in our alternative budget this year would be to redirect things like the 8 billion rand we're currently spending on VIP protection services for politicians to ensuring that our grant system is paying grants that are keeping up and above the food poverty line. That would make sure that those grants then were able to genuinely feed a pensioner, to feed a mother who was a single parent trying to keep her children fed and ready for school. And that would make some relief there. And then thirdly, we've obviously got to get the economy moving because it's jobs that lift people out of poverty. And we've got a government that cannot get to grips with load shedding. Our GDP is shrinking because government clings to outmoded policies that are killing jobs and killing investment. And we need to get this economy reformed and moving again so that we can get people into work, because a job is the best ladder out of poverty for South Africans. And that's why we have to be obsessive about job creation in this country. But we need to implement those immediate measures now to bring instantaneous relief to families. And I'm really urging government to get off its hands now and start working for the people of South Africa, not against them.
How do you think Minister Enoch Godongwana could afford the hunger relief measures? What would need to happen?
Well, we put on the table in the budget process this year under Dr. Dion George an alternative budget, which was tax neutral. In other words, you wouldn't have to introduce any more taxes, but you'd reallocate a lot of the fat in government's budget, things like reducing the size of cabinet. Do ministers have to be provided with 2 expensive mansions, one in Cape Town, one in China? Brintirian Estate is a massive estate. Do we need to be providing luxury vehicles? Do we need to be spending 8 billion rand a year on protecting cabinet ministers and their families while the rest of us are left to face dangerous criminals on a daily basis? These are the areas where we could cut the fat. Getting rid of these cumbersome state-owned entities on which most South Africans would never be able to fly, things like South African Airways, and redirecting that money towards areas of the economy that are going to bring immediate relief, but also to invest in our future. I'd much rather see us investing money in NISFA's system rather than South African Airways. Let's leave business to the private sector, and let's focus on using public money for public good and not for pampering politicians and not for vanity projects.